Everybody already knows who the very best fantasy wide receivers are in football, but I've projected out every single wide receiver this year, and I have the top 24 ready for you right here. Let's see who can break into that top echelon category. First up at wide receiver 24, it is DeAndre Hopkins. I'm sorry to a couple guys that I had to leave off the list, but I think Hopkins has another good year. He had over 1,000 yards last year and 7 touchdowns with absolute garbage quarterback play. We know Ryan Tannehill was very inaccurate, and when Will Levis played, he had one great game where DeAndre Hopkins scored 35 fantasy points, but outside of that, Will Levis had 4 touchdowns in his final 8 games. That's got to improve. But the Titans have changed coaches and showed that they really want to be a more pass-happy team this year. Brian Callahan used to be the offensive coordinator for the Bengals. He loves to throw the ball. They bring in Calvin Ridley, another good wide receiver. They bring in Tony Pollard, get rid of Derrick Henry. Everything points to them throwing the ball more and Will Levis breaking out. I have D-Hop at 13.8 points per game, 1,150 yards, and about 6.5 to 7 touchdowns. He was a top 5 route runner along with Garrett Wilson and A.J. Brown on ESPN's open score stat. And he was also second in the NFL in air yards last year and second in unrealized air yards. His quarterbacks just couldn't hit him, but he's going to get a lot of opportunity. Then we get to wide receiver 3, Michael Pittman Jr. at 13.6 points per game. You'll see I have him a little bit lower than D-Hop, but I think his floor is safer. The problem is he got so many targets when he was playing with Gardner Minshew last year, over 9.5 per game. I'm not sure that really holds up for the entire season with Anthony Richardson, who struggles in those short areas of the field. This team, in my eyes, is going to be extremely run-heavy, and Pittman is not a guy who can break the game on low volume. He really needs like 7 to 8 targets every single game. And for a big guy, he's also not really much of a red zone threat. He's really struggled to score many touchdowns in his career. I got him at 5 for the season and just barely breaking 1,000 yards. The couple games he did play with AR last year, he actually was pretty good and got targeted a fair amount, but bringing in Adonai Mitchell and Josh Downs was pretty good last year. I'm just not sure he gets that much. And we know when they get to the red zone, Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson are just going to run the ball. Why would they risk it when he's a bad quarterback and short accuracy? Then we go to wide receiver 22. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but it shouldn't be crazy. It's Chris Olave at 13.8 points per game. I got him just under 1,200 yards and 5 touchdowns. This seems very fair to me. He reminds me exactly of Terry McLaurin in the earlier parts of his career. He's a flashy deep threat, a lot of upside, but he's going to struggle in a horrible offense with a horrible quarterback to score any touchdowns. Anywhere you look, the Saints O-line is ranked 31st or 32nd in the league. Derek Carr is going to need time to get the ball to his main deep threat. If you don't have time in the pocket, you can't throw that far downfield. And in his first 2 years, he's averaged 13 to 14 points per game. Explain to me what's gotten better this year. I think nothing. So in underdog drafts, when he's going around pick 15, I just kind of laugh. I've never taken him once. Then we go to wide receiver 21. It is Devonta Smith. He's at 14 points per game. I got him at over 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. I think this Eagles offense gets a boost this year compared to last year. They started off strong, but the coaching was just really bad towards the end of the year, and they completely fell apart. Jalen Hurts also dealt with a knee injury that directly correlated with when the offense started going downhill. And I've heard a lot of rumblings out of minicamp that Devonta Smith will be mainly used on the outside and A.J. Brown will get even more snaps in the slot, which is good for Brown. I'm probably going to boost him in my rankings a little bit, and it's not too good for Smith. He's going to be very, inefficient. We don't know how many when the blow-up games are going to come and whatnot. I want those easy passes for him too, but you'll see I have his yards per reception kind of high at 13.7. Then our wide receiver 20 at 14.2 points per game is DJ Moore. He's getting a lot of competition now with Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen. With a rookie quarterback, we know these wide receivers kind of struggle in year one with rookie quarterbacks. I think I gave him a pretty fair projection. 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns, 85 catches. That's a lot for the situation he's in. He ran red hot last year on his efficiency with Justin Fields. I don't think that quite happens again. He's definitely not getting the insane amount of targets he got. And unfortunately, he's not going to touch the slot. That's completely Keenan Allen. So a lot of the easy dump offs he's going to get are kind of wide receiver screens on the outside, which how many of those can you really get? He's mainly going to be a deep threat. And speaking of deep threats, our wide receiver 19 is Nico Collins at 14.3 points per game. Pretty much all the routes he was running last year were really far downfield, so you'll see I only have him at 79 receptions and 15.9 yards per catch. That's a lot. The addition of Stephon Diggs obviously does not help, and Tank Dell missed so much time last year that I really don't quite believe exactly what he did last season. I don't think it really happens again, which is why my wide receiver 18 is actually Tank Dell. I'll just talk about them together. It was actually only 8 full games that Dell played, and he still had 7 touchdowns in 8 games. That's insane. Obviously, he doesn't keep up. I have him projected at 7 because Diggs is going to take some work, but the Houston Texans were a very middle-of-the-road team in terms of passing volume. That's going to skyrocket this year. I would guess that one of the 3 wide receivers in Houston does break like 15 to 16 points per game, especially with some injuries happening during the year, but it's going to be very hard to predict right now who that is. I just think Dell is the most talented. In my eyes, Diggs is in the slot, and these 2 guys are on the flanks just going nuts down the sideline. Now we get to wide receiver 17 at Drake London. I'm much behind consensus on him. 14.4 points per game. I got him used a little bit more downfield than he's been used previously. 88 receptions, almost 1,200 yards, and 6.25 touchdowns on the season. This is a pretty pretty big improvement with Kirk Cousins joining the offense. I got him averaging 4 more points per game than he's done at all over his career. But we got to remember they have Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, a lot of mouths to feed on this team. And so far from what he's shown me in the NFL, I'm really just not convinced of his skill set. So it's really hard to envision a breakout of over like 1,300 yards and anywhere even near 10 touchdowns. I know he's a big guy, but he doesn't really use that frame in the red zone too often. Then we go to wide receiver 16. It's Brandon Ayuk at 14.9 points per game. This is a little worse than last year just because he was so insanely efficient last year. Guys, he only had 105 targets last year. That's pretty pathetic. And I would love to sit here and say, okay, he's an alpha wide receiver one. He deserves more than that, but they have CMC, Kittle, and Debo. It's just not happening. There's too many mouths to feed. So 80 catches, 1,300 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 16.4 yards per catch. That's very generous. Last year, he was about 18 yards per catch. I don't think he quite does that again. This reminds me a lot of the Jalen Waddle season from 2 years ago where he was averaging 18 yards a catch, kind of blew up, and then he had a little bit of a, down year-ish, but he got hurt a lot, so that's not too fair. I'll just be honest, I prefer Debo Samuel in this offense. I got him up at wide receiver 12 at 15.7 points per game. His usage is much more predictable, and they actually use him near the goal line. He's going to score way more touchdowns than Ayuk. Then at wide receiver 15, we have DK Metcalf at 15.1 points per game, 83 catches, 1,262 yards, 8 touchdowns at 15.2 yards per catch. Ryan Grubb is going to completely open up and change this offense to way more pass happy. Say goodbye, Kenneth Walker. You'll be very efficient, but you're not getting like 250 plus attempts this year. And honestly, I'm really big on Tyler Lockett as well, and maybe even JSN. This offense is going to be a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. I'm a little bit upset actually that I haven't drafted more DK Metcalf. I've drafted about 60 best ball teams so far, but I just keep grabbing Cooper Kupp in the same range. I got to change that a little bit, get some DK, because he has real 10 plus touchdown upside. He's going to be used down the field a ton, and I think he's that talented. This could truly be his career best year. At wide receiver 14, we have Jalen Waddle at 15.2 points per game, 85 catches, 1,309 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 15.4 yards per catch. Last year, he averaged over 14 points per game, and he was very good, but he kept leaving a lot of games early. You look at his game log, and he has like a ton of games that he barely played. He like 60 to 50% of snaps. He was just always in the blue medical tent, and I'm not a guy who really holds injuries against players at all, so I think he'll be great this year again. He's someone I want a lot in my portfolio. You guys know how much I love Tyreek Hill and Raheem Mostert. I just love this offense in general, but the one downside that really sets him apart from Tyreek Hill is Tyreek had 25 red zone targets last year. Jalen Waddle wasn't even close. He had 8. That was 56th in the league. I think all his touchdowns are going to be from deep bombs. Speaking of touchdowns, at wide receiver 13, Mike Evans at 10.5, one of the top touchdown scorers in the league year in, year out. 15.4 points per game, 77 catches, over 1,200 yards again, almost 16 yards per reception. He's just going to be very efficient as usual. Dave Canales leaving is a little bit worrisome for Baker Mayfield. Maybe he takes a step back, kind of like Geno Smith did a year ago. Both of them had career years with Dave Canales. I hope he just, doesn't really change up what he was doing last year, but the system will be different. But how many times do we have to see Mike Evans break 1,000 yards, wreak havoc in the end zone? He's so consistent. You got to keep him this high, and there's a little bit of upside here too. If you want to see the top 12 wide receivers, I already made a video on that. Leave a like, leave a comment what you want to see next, and follow for more. Peace.